All righty, is everybody ready?
We're ready.
All
We're
right.
ready.
First off, thank you to everyone, our panelists, as well as our attendees for attending this afternoon's program. It's called Just the Facts. This is a new series of informative and educational programs that our Homeowner Education Committee wants to provide to members of the chapter. This specific episode is called Show Me the Money, Uncovering the Truth About Budgets and Assessments. First off, I'd like to talk to you all a little bit about CAI. For those of you who don't know us, if you're not a member of the chapter, or perhaps you are and you're just not very involved, CAI is a national organization. In fact, it's an international organization at this point, with some different types of memberships that are involved: community association managers, local service providers, homeowners, and board members. That includes homeowner associations, condo co-ops, and even individual homeowners who are invested in their community. And we are part of the Sarasota, Manatee, and DeSoto County areas as far as our chapter is concerned. We're the largest chapter in the state of Florida that includes 8 chapters total, covering all different regions of the state. And if you would like to learn a little bit more about membership benefits, you can reach out to myself or certainly any of today's panelists, as they are very well invested, established, and experienced members of our chapter in particular. So with that being said, as I mentioned, our Homeowner Education Committee is a newly put together group that wants to include information and programs like this moving forward for the chapter and its membership. Alan Tannenbaum, who is today's moderator, is the committee chair for the Homeowner Education Committee. Kevin Edwards, who serves on our board as board liaison. For Becker, we have Diane Alfano, who's a homeowner leader, Michael Biza of Century Insurance, Charlene Clements of Capstone Association Management, Doug Deerdorf of BKS Partner, Eric Godot of Castle Group, Eric Hager of AMI, Kathy Hayes, who's a homeowner leader, and Tyler Morton of Alliance Association Bank. So next time you see them, be sure to thank them for helping us put this program together. We're going to introduce today's panelists, and actually, Alan, I guess we're going to let them introduce themselves. Is that how you want to do it?
Yes, first I want to say a little bit about the session today, and then we're going to introduce the panelists.
Sure.
So the topic today is about money. What our obligations are as associations in handling it, how to assess for it, how to collect it, how to borrow it. It's a central issue for every association, because associations have broad responsibilities under statute and under your documents, and all of your activities take money. So this is going to cover that broad range of issues dealing with money. A disclaimer for the entire panel is each of these separate topics could be presented in an hour-long or multi-hour-long presentations. We're going to give you some tidbits. We're going to give you some things to think about. We're going to create some questions and give you some morsels, but you're not going to get a full range of disposition on each of these items. So that's our disclaimer for the group. So let me introduce the group. My partner, Cindy Hill, is a lawyer with Tannenbaum, Lamont, and Hill. And Cindy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Cindy Hill, and I specialize in condominium and homeowner association practice as an attorney. And I've been doing this for coming up on 19 years. I don't like to do the math. I just like to say that number. I've been doing it so in the Sarasota area exclusively for that time as well. I'm originally from the mountains of North Carolina, but my parents moved here when I was 15 with me. And I've been in the area ever since. And I'm very familiar with what Sarasota, Manatee, and Charlotte County needs are. For the associations that we represent, that range from as small as 3 or 4 unit condos to homeowner associations of thousands of lots. So I have quite a wide experience in what associations require, and I look forward to explaining some of the basics of that to the panel this afternoon.
All right, Cindy is what's known in the field as a general counsel. Next, Sheila Lee from SunWest Bank.
Good evening, Sheila Lee, SunWest Bank. I've been in banking for about 25 years. Right now, for the past 10 years, I work exclusively with community associations providing loans, mainly. That's my background, but we can help you with any of your banking needs in your communities.
Next, Jason Hamilton for Pinnacle Community Association Management.
That was a mouthful, definitely. Good afternoon, everyone. Jason Hamilton, as was mentioned. I'm one of the principals of Pinnacle. We're a full-service community association management firm based in Sarasota with 4 owner practitioners that are based in Sarasota as well. We serve condominiums, HOAs, and co-ops as small as 5 and as large as nearly 1,000, with the simple principle that we look at your home as our business. So we're focused on you, focused on your needs, and budgeting and proper budgeting is one of the most important things you can do, which, as Alan mentioned earlier, this could be an entire half-day seminar. So I'm looking forward to providing some of the CAM's perspective for you.
Now, Matt Cusley of Reserve Advisors.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Matt with Reserve Advisors. I've dedicated my career to reserve studies. I'm 23 years in as a professional engineer, professional reserve analyst, a reserve specialist. We work with about 2,500 associations in the state. I'm with Reserve Advisors, headquartered in Tampa, just up the road from most of you, but we do a lot of work in the Sarasota area. And I'm also a board member at my condo association. So I wear 2 hats sometimes as well. So I'm looking forward to the presentation today. Thanks.
And last but not least, Rich Fagan, who's the treasurer of Cobblestone on Palmer Ranch Homeowners Association.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm Rich Fagan, treasurer of Cobblestone. I'm actually a non-board treasurer, so I think I bring a sort of different perspective because I allow some transition in board members and continuity. I started out on the finance committee of our association. I became the chair of the finance committee. I've been very involved in doing the budgets for the community. We were turned over from Taylor Morrison in 2018, and we're sort of starting to hit some maturation stage as we grow. So it's been very interesting to go through this. I hope I can share some experiences with you.
You can see that we put together a panel today that really hits all aspects of money issues for associations. So hopefully we'll provide some valuable information for you. So let's get into it. First topic is reserves, mandated and discretionary. And I'm going to turn it over first to Cindy Hill on this particular subject. Go ahead, Cindy.
Okay, well, reserves, just to start, is what they are basically your savings accounts for your future expenses for your condominium or homeowner association. And you can see this little clever cartoon that somebody at CAI, presumably Scott, found for entertainment, where this gentleman doesn't want to save reserves because he doesn't even buy green bananas. All kidding aside, that has been a big problem in Florida, which has primarily retirees who buy into properties. I'm not trying to pick on retirees. This is just a economic reality, who didn't necessarily want to plan ahead. And there's been some corrections in the condominium law because of that, and some of the problems that came from the Surfside tragedy that brought to the attention of the legislature that certain funding was not being saved in the way that might be the best practices for older buildings. Before I get into that, I do want to say that whether you're a condominium or a homeowner association, is important for how I'm going to be explaining some of these details of the requirements throughout the panel. So do try to listen for that. If you're a condominium association, you are governed by Section 718 of the Florida statutes. If you're a homeowner association and you're a mandatory one, you're governed by 720 of the Florida statutes. If you're another type of entity altogether, you need to get with legal counsel and get some specific advice. All kidding aside, there are some other entities, and they are not necessarily going to fall into these general discussions we're going to have today, other than the practical aspects. So beginning with the reserves that are mandatory for condominiums, for many years, condominiums have been required under the Condominium Act to save reserve amounts for roof replacements, building painting, pavement resurfacing, and as the statute puts in a catch-all, any other item that has a deferred maintenance expense or replacement cost that exceeds $10,000. So that could very easily be your pool house, your clubhouse restrooms, any of these items that could require that kind of expense. But that was the standard for years and years and years that condominium associations have been operating under. That was again changed when the legislature took up the new legislation in response to the Surfside tragedy, the building that collapsed in South Florida. And there are now requirements and only certain condominiums have to meet these requirements. You have to be at least be 10 years old, and you have to be at least 3 stories. If you meet those requirements, you have to get what is called a structural integrity reserve study. It's commonly referred to as a SIRS in the industry. And that requires a whole new, let's just call it bucket for practical sake, requirements of reserves that your condominium association might now have to add if it did not already have reserves for some of these issues. The roof is still there, no surprise, but included in that list is also a structure, what could be load-bearing walls and structural members of the building, fireproofing and fire protection systems, plumbing, electrical systems, waterproofing and exterior painting. Waterproofing was added. Previously, exterior painting was the only one that was in the statute. Windows and exterior doors. Now, you might be sitting here thinking, well, my condominium's not responsible for windows, or we haven't had any plumbing problems. And those are all fair questions and issues that should be addressed per your association. The statute does include in there that with respect to items of a useful life that is not readily ascertainable or an estimated remaining life of greater than 25 years, the association is not necessarily required to reserve for those items, but it is required for items that are put in the study. So what does that mean in plain English? What that means is you have a statutory list, but it may be that the requirements don't apply to your particular condominium depending on the circumstances of maintenance and your buildings. So I can't advise that you make this decision in a void. I have to advise that you do get with general counsel and get advice as to what components of this might apply to your condominium association, but they are mandatory if they apply. And by that, I mean that starting on December 31st of 2024, those particular items in that bucket of the structural integrity reserve study cannot be waived by owners or reduced by owners in a vote. Those items now are mandated and have to be fully funded. So for those of you that this is news to, this will be a lot to take in. Again, I recommend you get with counsel, but that's really the summary, so to speak. I have to continue in the interest of time.
What about HOA, Cindy?
Well, that's where I'm going, except I was going to say there is some discretionary funding for condominiums because the issue was mandated and discretionary. And one of the ones we're seeing right now, by the way, are insurance premiums. Some associations are starting discretionary funding for insurance premiums. The important thing to know about discretionary reserve funding is if you use it for a purchase other than what you saved it for, you do have to get an ownership vote. So if you save it for insurance premiums and use it on the pool, you got to get owner permission. So moving on to HOAs. Water mandatory reserves and homeowner associations. Those are the ones that were required at the time the developer had the governing documents that required in those documents for the developer to make reserves. What's that mean in plain English? When your community was built, if certain reserves were obligated in the documents to be saved, those reserves are mandatory. Reserves can also be made mandatory after that fact if the owners vote to make them so.
But there's no statute.
That's in the statute. Other than that, your discretionary reserves are going to be based on documents. And if they are discretionary, you might have an obligation under the statute to put notices in your financial statements as to that. That's, again, a more specific topic to get with your general counsel.
All right, let's turn to Matt. Matt, you deal with reserves every day. What do you have to offer the group?
Yeah, so we're starting to conduct those structural integrity reserve studies. Our firm has professional engineers now. A couple of the changes I just want to clarify in the latest statute, we were very involved with the process and Senate Bill 154 that was signed this month by the governor about these new structural integrity reserve studies. They can now be conducted by professional reserve analysts and reserve specialists, and reserve specialists is one of the CAI designations. So this organization is actually named in the Florida statute now effective with this bill that was just signed. So not just PEs and engineers that can do it. Cindy, I'm surprised to hear you say 10 years, you have to be 10 years old to do a SIRS. That's the first I've heard of that. I don't believe that's in the statute, but I could be wrong there. So I would check. I think it's for all buildings 3 stories or more, regardless of age, as long as they existed prior to July 1st of 2022. They also clarified, thankfully, that homeowner maintained items would not be included. So those windows and doors that you mentioned would not be don't have to be part of the reserve study. But generally, the biggest issues that we see, and I was a part of the task force that was formed right after the building collapse, and they realized this right away as well, is that they did not have all of the right items on their reserve schedule. So condos are required to have a reserve schedule with their budget and disclose that to all of the owners each time they submit a budget every single year. And what they found in Surfside is that they didn't have all the items, and it's just the biggest issue I see is you just don't have the right items on the schedule. And so that's why the legislators wanted to go and build this bigger list, more detailed list of items that must be maintained. So at least we're getting most of the major components of the building on the schedule. But even things that aren't on the list, like elevators or stormwater systems, balcony railings, certainly are items that your community should want to have on their schedule, and is important because you're still required as a condo to reserve for roofing, painting, paving, and anything else over $10,000, even though some of those items can still be waived. Another big change with the latest law on waiving of the reserves is that it's actually increasing the threshold. You used to be able to waive reserves with the majority of the quorum, and now they're requiring a majority of the voting interests to waive or partially fund reserves. So if you've historically waived, the legislature is giving you that boost and encouragement to say, we've got to stop waiving reserves, because it really is just passing the buck. And unfortunately, it creates a situation where boards simply don't have enough money to do the projects that are needed. And unfortunately, there's only a few options that boards have when it comes time. And Sheila will tell you there's options for loans and lending for some associations. Many associations special assess, but absent one of those two ideas and absent the reserves, many boards get stuck with the do nothing option and fail to repair the building in a way, or buildings, facilities, infrastructure in a quality way, which can obviously have all sorts of detrimental effects that we want to keep out of. So one of the best points I have, and of course it's self-serving because it's what I do, but is to get that reserve study from an independent qualified professional, whether it's required by law, which the SERS now is for buildings 3 stories or more, every 10 years, which is a very long time to go between estimates. So as a side, I would recommend looking at it a little more frequently than that. Or you're a homeowners association that's not required to do it, but want to have good information for the board, for the membership. If you're a board member, you have that fiduciary duty. So communicate, get the study and communicate it to your members. Make sure they understand what it means. Buyers are becoming, I think, a little bit more sophisticated and understanding that it's not just about how much the monthly or quarterly assessments are in the community, but what does it include? What does it cover? And when you're able to show a good financial health, you might be able to sell even a higher a monthly assessment to potential buyers. And we're already seeing buyers asking about these new requirements too. So a couple of the other requirements that were put in is if you don't do these studies, both the SERS or the milestone, it becomes a breach. You can be found in breach of your fiduciary duty. And also it extends the ability for transactions to be voided, the void period for transactions. So it's definitely going to be something that communities are going to want to get.
Matt, let's turn it over to Rich. Rich, as a homeowner association treasurer, what points do you have about reserves?
Yeah, as I was listening to this one, some of the things that popped in my mind is, one, I would encourage anyone, if they've not either attended or watched a video on it. So there's lots of people in Matt's profession that gladly do 1-hour presentations on this particular topic that takes you from A to Z. And it's very enlightening. So I would encourage anyone to do that. Couple of other things, especially if you're in HOAs, we've made it, at least in my community, we say we will do a full update at least every 3 to 4 years, and we do an annual update. Just a check-in, basically update that Matt can give a little bit more context to, but just to see if we're on course correction, and having people understand that there are 2 sort of key deliverables from a reserve study. The reserve component list, which is the A to Z of everything that they've gone through, and including estimated replacement costs, and then the funding plans. And communicating those and understanding those to your constituents is an important thing, because if they start understanding that in a way that you can just basically summarize, right? Our replacement costs went up. Why? Inflation, bad estimates, et cetera. That's important, the importance of having this done. And then there's a couple different ways to fund. There's the pooled method, and Matt, what's the other term for the other method of funding? I call it specific ID, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, straight line or component method.
Right. So having people understanding whether you're doing pooled funding or the other methodology is important. Obviously, in condos, you get a little bit more to the specific ID, if you will. So having people understand that and understanding why you're funding it in a particular fashion and showing them the funding schedule is very enlightening for people. So, distilling the information for your constituents is good. And then having them understand the importance of that study. And when somebody's looking for a new home, one of the first things they ask the realtor to ask the HOA is, show me the budget for the last year and tell me when the last reserve study was done and how you're funded. And I could tell you, I'm fortunate, or we have a fairly new community, but we're very well reserved, and people comment on it, and it's reflected in the home prices. So that's just some of the observations I'd like to share with people.
All right, Rich, thank you. Complicated subject, obviously would take a lot of discussion, but let's move to establishing a realistic budget. And I'm going to turn the panel over to Jason Hamilton, Community Association Manager.
Certainly. So I think the key metric here to think about and to understand is a realistic budget. What I would say to you first is CAI has a great budgeting basics online downloadable PDF that's literally called Community Association Budgeting Basics. It's a step-by-step that will take any homeowner or any new board member that really has never done this before through the basics of what they should be doing. But I think the key points that I would like everyone to take away is, we've talked a lot about reserve budget items for the first part of the class here so far. And I want to focus on that, but I also want to focus on the budget overall. When I say create a realistic budget, there's a mindset in certain communities about trying to keep a certain stability with the level of owner dues. I'm going to use the word dues instead of assessment because a lot of people confuse the term assessment with just special assessment, which we are going to talk about. And this is one of my least favorite trends that I've seen. Now, it's less of a trend because of the insurance issues that we're dealing with significant percentage increases. But I never liked the idea of taking a number, and let's say that number is $2,000 a quarter, and trying to keep it flat for 5 years. It's just not a realistic way to budget, first of all. And secondly, there's some communities that I've seen will try to take that number and they will back into it. And to me, establishing a realistic budget is really doing a couple of things. Number one, setting goals for the community, whether we're talking about reserve items, and that's been really talked about pretty specifically short time ago, but also for your standard budget line items. Not only understand what your goals are, you have to understand the tolerance of your community and whether the community is tolerant of a small increase or even a moderate sized increase in your normal operating dues, or whether the community doesn't care about special assessments. And I don't think that's ever going to be the case. Owners are always going to care about special assessments, but you've got to weigh that risk and that concern with the membership overall. That's number one. And so goals are things like, you don't want to special assess for insurance. Okay, then you need to try and build a realistic understanding of what your insurance increase might be to the extent that you can by partnering with your agent as early as possible. Secondly, you don't want to special assess for storm cleanup. Well, then perhaps you should establish a storm cleanup line item in your budget. We've dealt with that now twice in the last 6 or 7 years. At the same time, think in terms of what your options are, and also, thinking by partnering with the different service providers that you work with. And I would do this very early in the budget process, because the worst thing you can do is try to push and get into October and not understand, what sorts of, let's call them inflationary pressures your service providers are under. So when I say make contact with your service providers, I would do it early, whether you're going out for an RFP or a request for proposal for services, make contact with them in June and July, even to touch base with how is business going? At the same time, what sort of increases are we looking at for next year, if any? And let's not kid ourselves, there are going to be increases in this inflationary environment. Anybody that says that they're not, I don't think they're effectively running their business, but that's another seminar for another time. My point is, by having these conversations with service providers now, you can get the data, determine if you need to look at alternatives, or decide whether that's even a service that you honestly need. And one of the things that I've seen on the chopping block, looking at our great cartoon here, have been these bulk cable arrangements. We've had condo associations that have had these for many years. They're coming up on renewal, and they realize that this is an opportunity to create some budget space to do some other things, or perhaps plan for contingency. The other thing I would say as a best practice is use your past budget and your year-to-date data as an opportunity to establish a trend along with that service provider information. And then most importantly, and this has been hit on, for the love of God, do not defer your reserves and try to kick the can down the road, because that's when you get these massive special assessments, because the can has been kicked for 5, 10, 15 years. And on the condo side, in certain categories, you won't be able to do that. On the HOA side, it's just not a best practice to begin with.
All right, Jason, thank you. Rich, you want to chime in on budget issues?
Yes, I think he made some excellent comments. We try to have our people on our community understand that we actually do a zero-based budget, where we challenge every line that's there, and we work closely with our CAM to get things lined up. We actually have different committees in our community. So for example, we have a buildings, roads, and amenity center community or committee. We have a lifestyle committee. We have a grounds committee. And what we're doing is we're getting those committees to come up with prioritized lists that they recommend to the board with regard to future things that need to be done. And then seeking with the CAM and others, seeking some estimates, just so you have an idea of those. So we can always prioritize into the future, because we have a goal actually of starting to do a 3-year, we call a 3-year rolling forecast. So in essence, you're doing a forecast for 3 years and then updating your first year to become your budget. That's sort of a goal that we have out there. We try and make people understand that, we budget for assessments and, obviously a zero, break even assessment. And then we tell them if we have a surplus, we have prioritized, we have a methodology of how we're going to use that surplus, either by using it for projects that weren't in the budget that the board deems appropriate, building up emergency reserves, and that's, for those things that Jason talked about, you could call a storm line or whatnot. But in the context of we try and break out. If we have a storm and we do cleanup, we break out and make sure people understand what that is, so that they understand why we may want to consider an additional surplus. And then we also consider whether to take some of that surplus, if there is any, and make a discretionary contribution to the reserves. Having people involved. We also actually do a budget workshop. So before we finalize the budget, we actually have a meeting where homeowners can see the preliminary budget and ask questions about it. So those may be some things that people consider. It depends on the size of your community, the involvement of your people, et cetera. But I agree with Jason, getting into that, well, we can't have more than a 4% or 8% increase is not realistic, and you should do everything in your power to not have that.
All right, Rich, what I'll add quickly on the budget is that for condos, there are pretty strict statutory procedures on when the budget has to be presented to the owners. There's time requirements on how a budget meeting, when it has to occur and so forth. So we're not going to get into that today, but it's a little bit stricter as far as the procedures that follow for condos. So Cindy, real quick, budget amendments. What is a budget amendment, and where and when is it possible?
Okay, the good news is for both condos and HOAs, you can amend the budget at any time. You just have to follow the procedures you followed in passing the original budget. So like Alan was saying, there's some specific procedures for condominiums. Some HOA documents also have some very detailed procedures, but you can amend the budget at any time. And the advantage to that can be, we're going to talk about special assessments next, but as opposed to a special assessment, amending the budget might give you some more flexibility to play out some of the unexpected expenses or expenses that weren't planned for by a previous board or developer in a way that you don't have to create a specific purpose like you do for a special assessment. Amending the budget might also be just candidly a more user-friendly way of addressing the inflation or the other unexpected costs that you have. So I encourage my clients to consider that when they are also considering a special assessment and or a loan for the financial needs they have in their community. Because again, it's not one that most boards realize that you can do that. That is definitely an option.
All right, Cindy, why don't you just move into special assessment at this point as an alternative to a budget amendment for needs that were not covered by the regular budget?
Yeah, and special assessments that have already come up and been discussed are assessments that are meant to be special, not in the way of the cartoon. Special must be good, right? No, don't we all wish? But special in that they're meant to be particular funds used for a particular use that was either unanticipated or has been the result of rising costs, basically. So it's a way to kind of put a Band-Aid on a budget issue, so to speak, by funding for something. And what I see in my practice, just briefly, is problems with the procedural part of the special assessment. Make sure, even though you have a really valid reason for putting together a special assessment for your community, that you definitely check the boxes and do it right, or owners can turn around when you start demanding they pay it and challenge it because you didn't follow the proper procedures. So for condominiums, you have to have a meeting at which you deliver 14 days notice to all the owners. So it's a board meeting, not just to the board members, but to all the owners, stating that there's going to be a meeting at which a special assessment will be considered. And it has to approximate also what the cost could be of the special assessment and also the purpose of the special assessment. So I get clients who ask me, what about the cost? We don't maybe know the specific cost. We haven't yet had the board meeting. How are we going to decide? You can give a cost window. And then make the decision at the board meeting. The key point is to be acting in good faith and giving owners a notice of what could happen at the board meeting in terms of the special assessment.
All right, Jason, chime in on special assessments.
I think Cindy hit the nail on the head. And not only acting in good faith, but be transparent. This entire budget process needs to be transparent. And just flipping back to what something Rich mentioned earlier about the budget workshop, that's what the budget workshop does. It's about being transparent. So with your special assessment, not only be specific, but level with the ownership group as to why you're doing what you're doing. The other important thing, I think, along with not only delivering what is quote unquote bad news, because you wouldn't have a special assessment if you weren't delivering bad news, is don't try to sugarcoat things. Be straightforward, be upfront, but then to the extent that you can, estimate every single cost affiliated with that special assessment. And here is one that not a lot of people think about, but one of my boards recently did. And it was something that we've been doing for a while and we advocate for. So they're going to pass a special assessment for storm-related cleanup. And it was something, a cost that was incurred a couple of months ago. It's finally coming to fruition. They're going to collect. Well, one of the costs of the special assessment is not only the cost of the postage, but printing the letter and then sending the notices to all of the owners, but then also sending up the follow-up payment notices that have to go out from the bank for the lockbox to be able to process and apply the special assessment correctly. Those costs should be folded into your special assessment estimate, so that way they're not coming out of your operating budget. So that way you're taking in good faith what is a crappy situation and hopefully dealing with it and then moving the ball forward.
All right, Sheila, you need to unmute. There you go.
Yes,
Okay,
hello.
so regular budgets and amended budgets and special assessments, it's all direct method of getting money from owners to pay for association operation. Sheila's going to give you some alternatives from a lending standpoint.
Yes, so basic thing I'm gonna just touch base on. First of all, let's read my little cartoon here. Increase the HOA fee. What does that have to do with getting a loan? You know, we do have to pay it back a loan if you don't have the funds to do the project. So I'm just gonna touch base on some of the underwriting considerations that we look at. And, you know, every one of you has touched on every one of these bullet points that I'm going to talk about. But main thing we're going to ask you for reserve study. When was it done? We're going to look at the remaining useful life of the projects and the project that you're asking us to fund. You know, are you funding your reserves? What percentage are you funding the reserves? Typically, we like to see at least 10% of your reserves or 10% of your dues going into reserves. I know if FHA loans, you have to have at least 10% going in for buyers to come into your communities. Delinquencies, it's another big topic. We kind of look at like a 5%, less than 5% delinquencies in your communities. There are mitigations to that. If owners have passed away and or they're in collections with an attorney, you know, we can consider that if that percentage is higher, but we typically like to see 5% or less. What we look at is rental units, 15% or less in the community. Percentage of assessment increase for your loan. We can go up to 10, 15-year term, obviously, if it lines up with what your useful life of the project is. But, you know, obviously, we're going to kind of not go over 50%. That's kind of what the threshold is for that. So when you come to me and ask for a loan, I'm going to ask you for your budgets, look at your delinquency, your financial statement, and ask you when your last reserve study was done. And those are like the key points that we're going to look at when we consider a loan for you.
And how far out are loans typically for? 3 years, 5 years, 10 years?
So that's going to depend on the scope. And as I mentioned, if you do a roofing project, you know, the useful life of a roof can be 20 years. So that allows me to go out a little bit longer, you know, versus a painting project. You know, painting usually only lasts 5-7 years. So obviously we're going to go out a shorter term for that. So it's going to be based upon the scope of the work being done in the project that's involved.
Do you generally require that the association put aside some of its own funds as part of a lending package? How does that work?
Yeah, so that's kind of where I get that 10% of the reserves. So, you know, we can 100% finance if you have that put away and you don't want to, you know, deplete all of your reserves for the loan, you know, but we do like to see that you have at least 10% of what you're asking for in a reserve account.
Let me just ask Cindy and Jason again to chime in. Just talk a little bit about the strategies, you know, with your different communities. Why is it beneficial for some to go with a loan versus some to do a special assessment versus some to do a budget amendment? Jason, how do you advise your associations to make a choice between the three alternatives?
Biggest thing is trying to take the temperature of the membership. And so, you know, if you're looking at a significant special assessment, let's use the greatest, most fun topic of the day, insurance, the insurance industry. If you're talking about a 400% increase on a barrier island, well, perhaps your owners are more tolerant of a special assessment. There's not a whole lot they can do about it. If you're living in a different community where, you know, things are a little more of a shoestring budget, they may have to look at a line of credit simply because they don't have that financial flexibility or because they kicked the can down the road and not gotten a reserve study. So I think it takes into considerations factors like that, along with, again, just the general financial health of the community and its ownership.
Yeah, would you say also the age of the community, like a group that's coming through turnover that might have a significant engineering study that needs to be undertaken and maybe auditing and so forth, that to cover those with a loan rather than hit owners for a greater budget, which they're probably already getting sticker shock having seen the developer may have understated the budget.
I
during
think the other thing to
control.
take into consideration too is also the number of times that you're going to try and special assess.
Right.
And that's where I like Cindy's point about the budget amendment. You know, try to take into consideration everything you're going to do or need to do in a short period of time to amend the budget. So you're not doing 3 special assessments between now and the end of the year. You want to piss off your ownership, that's going to do it.
Right.
Yeah, you can only go to the well so many times.
Right. We will look at that as well. If you have any outstanding special assessments, how much longer you owe for that, you know, so that is a consideration as well.
All right, well, let me get back, Matt back into the conversation. So Matt, and again, any of the panelists can answer this. So you have this significant, for condos, the significant reserve requirement now. Can you go to Sheila to fund the reserve requirement? Does that, City, can you do that?
Is that a document issue? Is that if it's in your documents? I'm not sure.
Cindy, can you chime in on that?
I'm sorry, Alan, you broke up on my end there at the end. What were you
All
asking?
right, so let's say a condo has this big reserve requirement.
Mhm.
Can it go to Sheila and have that borrow the money to fund the reserves?
I'm not aware that a bank would do that as a practical matter.
Okay, so that's not practical, Sheila?
No,
Like I say, I was asked that question and there happened to be an attorney in the class, and it was mentioned, you know, if your documents allow you to do so, you know, so we would, as long as, you know, we get attorney opinion letter, things like that, owner votes if needed. So it's not out of the question.
it certainly would be an unusual set of
Yes.
circumstances.
Right.
I have not seen it happen. And my advice to clients has been generally, to the extent you have an issue now with the reserves, you're going to have to amend your budget to catch up. You're going to have to. And it may mean that you can take out loans for other purposes. But you're going to have to follow these new statutory requirements for your condominium. You're going to have to fund the reserves. And the statute for the condominium does not say funding by borrowing. It says funding.
Right.
All
And
right,
I think that's the key right there is, again, we're talking about being realistic. Having a 15 or 20% increase in your budget to handle your reserves is not necessarily popular. And I don't mean to sound insensitive, but it has to be done.
Matt?
Yeah, I don't think, and I think the thing to keep in mind here, and a lot of people have this concern, well, the new deadline is December 31st, 2024, means we have to have all the money in the bank for all the reserve projects and all the things that we've waived in the past, and that's simply not true. The reserve requirement that we're talking about is to ensure that they have funds when the project needs to be replaced. So if there is a project that needs to be done in 2025, then absolutely financing may be a good option to get that project done. But if we're talking about something that needs to be done in 3, 4, 5 years down the road, and chances are it's a series of projects that's going to happen, that's what we typically see. It's not a matter of using financing to get your reserve balance to where you want it to be. It's a matter of starting to get your budget and building up the balance on your own to make sure that you have the money when that project needs to be done.
That's an excellent clarification, Matt. We're not
Yeah.
trying to give anybody on this Zoom heart failure.
Right.
You don't have to fully fund everything. You have to be able to do it incrementally.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, Cindy, we're going to turn quickly to effective assessment collection. And again, this probably a 3-hour topic, so I'm going to ask you to do it in 5 minutes. So go ahead.
Okay, well, what's effective is what is already done well before it gets to the attorney's office, because as you might be able to guess, there's certain parts of the collection process that have to be performed by an attorney, such as filing a claim of lien. That cannot be done by anyone other than an attorney. So before you send it to when you start the process, the friendly process or the 30-day notice that is in both statutes, it's important that you know what interest your documents let you charge and what late fees your documents let you charge. I can't tell you how many times I have seen that be erroneous when we got an owner forwarded to our office for collection. And I don't say that to insult anyone. These documents can be a challenge to read. They can be contradictory, but it's best policies to know from your attorney what your interest and late fee rights are right out the door so that they are right by the time they get to the attorney's office. The other is to watch fining. I see fines put on ledgers, and in condominium associations, you cannot include fines as an assessment. That's a huge no-no. The statute specifically says it. So if you want to collect fines in a condominium association, assessment lien foreclosure is not the process. For HOAs, it may be document driven. So those are my out the door advice.
Jason, anything to say about assessment collection?
I think more than anything else, consulting with your counsel to make sure you get the late fees and interest right is the absolute key. The other thing to consider is the board has a fiduciary responsibility along in concert with its management firm and its CAM to keep tabs on where its accounts receivable level is at. If you're approaching 5% or more in delinquency, that's something you need to address by either doing one of two things: ensuring that you have a collection process in place that is following your governing documents and again is supported by your legal counsel, or to the point where you consider an interim alternative. And there are firms out there that will work on behalf of the association to collect the actual dues that are owed. And of course, there's a cost to that. The part of the cost to that is, they would keep a portion or all of the interest and fees associated along with that while the association actually gets its dues. But you want to understand what your goal is. Is your goal to penalize, or is your goal to gain, to really fund your budget effectively by collecting all of the dues and just making owners understand why they need to pay these dues by being transparent?
Let's talk about the strategy when you have a particular owner who is behind in their assessments, but they're also behind in their mortgage payment. And the mortgage lender may actually file a foreclosure action pursuing the mortgage foreclosure. What are the strategy alternatives under those circumstances for pursuing the lien assessment foreclosure when there is a pending mortgage foreclosure on the same property? Cindy, you want to attack that first?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of issues to look at. First of all, how fast is the mortgage foreclosure moving? Is it stalling? Does it look like it's going to be completing itself as a term of getting the case completed and foreclosed? Although there's no crystal ball on that. You can just look and see where it's going and maybe get an idea. The other issue is, what is the house being foreclosed for? Because if the house is being foreclosed for an amount that you can pretty much guess that an investor won't buy it because the debt is higher than the equity in the house, then that's an important distinction for the association to consider, because it could end up foreclosing on the property, and then it's going to own the property at that point because no one else is going to buy it until the mortgage process is complete. And it may or may not the association may or may not want to be in the business of renting a property, as opposed to if the equity in the property looks solid and the association goes ahead and does its foreclosure, an investor might step in and buy the property in the meantime, so the association gets its funds while the mortgage foreclosure continues to take its time. If you're not familiar with the process, just to back up, association lien foreclosure is the same process as a mortgage foreclosure. It's just any first mortgage holder on a bank has a lien that is superior to the association's. So that's why these considerations are important.
And if an association forecloses on its lien while the lender is still foreclosing on the mortgage, does the association have to pay the mortgage?
No, the association does not have a contract with the mortgage holder. The association will never be in that position. Its analysis needs to involve where it thinks it will be in the best position to get as many of the assessments paid on the property as it can. Because if the first mortgage holder takes possession of the property, if they win the bid, so to speak, at the mortgage foreclosure, they get a statutory cap on what they owe. They get a break. They're banks.
Okay. Let's, and Scott, I don't know if there's been any questions coming through from the folks in the audience today. I haven't seen any questions come through on chat unless I'm missing them.
I haven't either, but please keep in mind that if you do have a question and you're part of the audience side of this program, feel free to send something in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll be happy to relay that information to our panelists.
All right, so this is what I'm going to do because we have 10 minutes left. I'm going to go back through the panel to provide some closing statements on any subject they would like to comment on. So, Rich, any parting thoughts on the basis of what we talked about today?
Sure, I'd like to reiterate a comment that Jason alluded to earlier is that, the best thing you do is communicate and be transparent. And if you do that, your ownership will understand. They may not like the answer they get, but they'll understand. Just show them that you've done the work, you've been thorough, and you use the appropriate third parties, and things will go well. Just on that, just a minor detail on that last topic of assessment collection. If you're the treasurer or board member, stay out of it. They're your neighbors. Could be your neighbors. Let your property manager and the other third parties involved handle that stuff. Until it's appropriate for you to get involved. So.
Sheila, if you unmute yourself.
There we go.
There you go. So parting thoughts.
Just, the basic thing I'm seeing, it's surprising, not updated reserve studies. So that's one of the things I can say. Reserve, get your delinquencies in order. Those are the main things that I'm seeing. Main things that you can do to help your community and let us help you. So.
All right, Cindy. Anything you want to elaborate on that I might have cut you off before?
Well, I was just going to say, I think Rich raises a point about, these being your neighbors, your people and your friends potentially in the community. In tough times, you have to remember that these communities are also a business. If you're on the board, you are running a business. Yes, it's a not-for-profit, but it's a business. And you do want to try to avoid uncomfortable situations. And you definitely want to be fair and transparent. And I think that knowing that those have to be your goals, legal counsel and management and advisors and bankers can assist you in assuring you're following the laws and your documents. But you have to remember, as a board, to the extent you want to be nice to somebody, or maybe you want to give somebody a break, these are not going to be good practices, even though they might be feel goods.
Cindy, there's a question for you or for any panelist. For a new homeowners association going through turnover at the end of July with a new board, should the new board consider a budget amendment at this point for hurricane storm cleanup? I guess that means a budget amendment before turnover. I suppose if the developer is willing to do that, what do you think about that, Cindy?
Well, for a homeowner association, again, that will be more document driven, less statutory driven. But if the developer is willing to cooperate, potentially, yes, that could be done. Potentially.
Let me ask you this question, Cindy, or any of the panelists. I think back in the old days, we talked about something called the rent strike. So if a association member is unhappy with a board policy, are they able to withhold their assessment as a means of getting, or expressing their unhappiness about a particular policy?
Absolutely not. The case law is very clear and has been so for decades that the only defenses to not paying assessments are either your payment was somehow misapplied, meaning you sent a check, you can show it was cash, but they're saying you never paid. Or if there was a problem in the procedure for instance, for the special assessment, if the board didn't follow the proper procedure imposing the special assessment, the owner can contest it and say, I'm not paying it because proper procedure was not followed. But you cannot say, I don't like how you trimmed the landscaping in front of my property, I'm not paying. And I'm being a bit facetious with the example, but no, you cannot do that. And as a practical matter, imagine if that was a legal right. Everybody would have a reason not to pay their assessments. So, but that's an excellent question, Alan. It is important to know for boards when they are proceeding with assessment collections, really the only defense is a practical matter is either a failure procedure by the board or non-payment, or payment that is being applied as a non-payment. So these are fairly safe litigation factors to get into in terms of the board's in a good position.
Jason, let me ask you this. If an association has a 3% delinquency, where does the money come from to make up for the people who aren't paying?
One of three things, and it's point blank because it has to come from somewhere. It's a budget amendment. Well, let me back up. Four things: contingency fund, if you have one, budget amendment, a special assessment, or potentially a loan. as much as we wish we could, we can't print money like the government does. So your budget is your budget. You can only squeeze so much blood from a turnip.
Well, one of the things that boards confront, you have an owner with financial issues. It could be a widower who wasn't properly provided for, let's say with a life insurance policy, or somebody has a financial deficit, and they come to the board and they say, look, I just can't afford to pay. What are the options at that juncture for an association board? What flexibility do they have, and what's an appropriate response?
Well, I hate to again to answer, but I feel like that's an attorney question to a certain extent. The board does have some flexibility to help an owner who's had a hardship get back on their feet through a payment plan. But at the same time, the board cannot let an owner just indefinitely delay making payments to the association, because it's to the detriment of the community, like your question to Jason implied, Alan. When everybody's not paying the assessments, there's a hole there that has to be dealt with.
I think there's also something else that's important to relate to, and as from the attorney standpoint, you have that flexibility. Yes, you can't be picky and choosy about applying it. If you're going to offer it to one person, you have to offer it to others. You can't not offer it because you don't particularly like someone.
Correct. You have to be uniform.
Rich, do you get any of those pleas from any of the owners about not having the financial resources to meet an assessment obligation?
No, I can't say that we're very fortunate that we've had very little of that in our community. So I wish I could offer more, but we're in the fortunate position of not experiencing that.
And I think what happens, and again, Matt or Jason can chime in on this, and Cindy, how does economic downturns, recessions and so forth, how does that impact the challenges with assessment collection? Jason,
I think from all aspects, there's a challenge there. And I think that's where some alternatives, like the alternative I mentioned a little bit earlier, perhaps considering contracting with a firm that does collections and that is their job, they're able to set up payment plans. The biggest thing is, while you want to be empathetic, I still revert back to what Cindy said earlier. The board has a fiduciary responsibility and you're running a business. So, I get it, economic downturns happen. We're facing a difficult labor market here, and that's a function of why provider costs keep increasing. You still have to fund the association.
Cindy, you have something to comment on that?
I agree. And then the harsh reality is, and it's harsh, and I'm a nice person, I don't like this harsh reality, but the harsh reality is some people are not going to be able to afford to keep their property. And that's something that we can all as people feel empathetic to, but as board directors, you have a fiduciary duty to the owners, and letting someone stay in a property that ultimately they can't afford is really not doing them a favor either. So unfortunately, some people are going to have to relocate.
True. All the more reason to be transparent as a board member on the true cost of ownership. That's
Bingo, Matt. Absolutely.
For members. And that was one of the things I was going to say, like, and to just kind of closing to, like Rich said, there's a lot of professionals out here to help you through this, but it is not, and it's not nice that it's increasing, but it is also not your fault. And I feel a lot of board members personalize it, but this is bigger issues. And again, the insurance market is not the board's fault to protect their owners from. It's about making sure they understand what we're up against and educating homeowners. And you have a team of professionals at CAI and other places to help you communicate that, come to the board meetings, and hopefully your owners will understand the difficult decision and the difficult job that it is to be on a board. We understand that, and we're here to help you as well. And really quick, Elise had a question about in the chat that I don't want to miss, about condos less than 3 stories. So shifting gears, back to the reserve side of it, if I have a minute. Senate Bill 154 clarified that only buildings that are required to have a SERS, which would be buildings 3 stories or more, would fall under the mandatory funding of the SERS items. This was under the old law, under SB 4D. The division had opined that this would apply to all buildings regardless of the number of stories. So that was what has changed in the last month or so. What did change for buildings less than 3 stories is that in order to waive or partially fund any of their reserves, again, they're still required to have reserves for roofing, painting, paving, anything else over 10,000. To waive or partially fund any of those reserves is now going to require a majority of the voting interests as opposed to a majority of a quorum. So again, you've got to convince more of the membership, 50% or more of the total ownership group, that it's a good idea to waive or partially fund the reserves. Some communities will still be able to do that, though, to answer your question, Elise. Good questions.
So we're going to come to a conclusion here, and what I'd like to say is you have very knowledgeable people on this panel, on the committee, and within CAI. If you have questions, everybody on the panel is happy to receive questions. I think Scott's going to publish our contact information. We can't answer specific questions on your specific needs in their community, but certainly general discussion on an issue that you're facing to point you in the right direction. But the overall issue is, it is complicated. The statutes, especially the Condo Act, are as they've altered, very difficult to decipher. Every community's got a different constitution through its declaration. There's a multiple variations on the theme, and you need to tread carefully because everybody's got a fiduciary duty if you're running on the board of directors of an association. So make use of the talent that exists within CAI to support you and help guide you through the challenges. So hopefully we've awakened some thoughts, giving you some valuable information, and pointed you to the resources that are there to support you on these very challenging issues. So Scott, you want to say something in conclusion?
Sure. I just would like to thank our panelists for the time. There was preparation that went into this program even before. They didn't just jump on. I know they all come off as experts just by the wind of their seats, but no, I mean, they took the time to get together and discuss how they wanted to approach this program for you all as attendees. So again, thank you just not only for your time tonight, but in preparation and putting this program together. Anybody on the call, if you would like the contact information of any of the panelists, you can reach out to me directly. You have my email address because you got the Zoom link, and I will provide as much contact information as has been permitted by the panelists themselves to me. So again, thank you everybody for your time. If there's any follow-up questions, please feel free to email me and I can direct those to our panelists as well. And thank you again. We appreciate it.
Scott, the all important what's next?
What is next?
One of these wet.
What are we saying? September?
That's right.
All right.
We're
Be on the
gonna do it
lookout for
by
our next program.
Zoom. And we'll announce the topic as early as possible so that all of you will have the benefit of what we're going to be presenting in September, and probably a live presentation come December. So that's what you have to look forward to.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.